Working title: The Flamingo War. My name is Jake, and I never expected to find myself at war over plastic flamingos. When I moved into this HOA-governed neighborhood a year ago, I kept my head down, paid my dues, and followed the rules. I mowed my lawn, took my trash bins in on time, and generally tried to avoid drawing attention to myself. But then, there was Karen. Karen Pierce, the self-appointed queen of the HOA, had made it her life's mission to enforce the most absurd rules with an iron fist. She had already bullied the Johnsons into removing their wind chimes, forced the Petersons to repaint their front door twice, and single-handedly waged war on patio furniture that clashed with the aesthetic. But I didn't care about any of that, until the day I walked outside to find my flamingos missing. At first, I thought it was a prank. Maybe some neighborhood kids messing around. But then I checked my security footage. There she was, Karen, in broad daylight, marching across my lawn like she owned the place, plucking each flamingo out of the ground with the efficiency of a serial killer disposing of evidence. No hesitation. No guilt. Just a smug little smirk as she dumped them into a black trash bag and strutted away as she had just done the neighborhood a great public service. I was fuming, but I wasn't about to start a war over a few plastic birds. I figured I'd knock on her door, ask for them back, and be done with it. Big mistake. Karen answered the door with that same smug expression. Before I could even finish my sentence, she hit me with a printed HOA violation notice. My flamingos, she explained, were in clear violation of community decorum and had been confiscated per HOA guidelines. Confiscated? Since when was she the flamingo police? I pointed out that other houses had decorations, wreaths, garden gnomes, even a wooden bear statue on Mr. Thompson's lawn. But Karen just smiled. Those are tasteful. Your flamingos were an eyesore. Then she shut the door in my face. That should have been the end of it. I could have let it go. But Karen had underestimated just how petty I could be. The next morning, I replaced my missing flamingos with 20 more. Bigger. Brighter. Some wearing sunglasses. A couple decked out in tiny Hawaiian lace. That night, I watched my security feed with a bucket of popcorn as Karen stormed onto my lawn, frothing with rage. She yanked them out one by one, muttering under her breath, hurling them into a garbage bag like a lunatic. I laughed. This was too easy. So, I escalated. The next day, I set up a full flamingo army. 40 of them were perfectly aligned in military formation. I even rigged a few to rotate with the wind, so they would always face Karen's house, watching her. The next morning, I woke up to a thick, official-looking HOA notice taped to my door. A $500 fine for repeat violations. Karen had called in reinforcements. This time, it wasn't just her. An actual HOA committee had shown up in the dead of night, clipboards in hand, marching onto my property like a SWAT team, seizing flamingos left and right. Okay, game on. Karen thought she had won. But what she didn't realize was that she had just declared war. And I don't lose wars. After receiving my final warning from the HOA, I decided to change tactics. If I wanted to take Karen down, I couldn't do it alone. I needed allies. That evening, I got an unexpected knock on my door. It was Mr. Thompson, my next-door neighbor, a quiet, retired guy who usually kept to himself. "You got a second?" he asked, stepping inside. He sat down with a sigh and leaned forward. "You're not the first one Karen's done this to." And that's when I found out. Karen had been terrorizing the neighborhood for years. She had personally fined the Johnsons over their bird feeder, forced the Martinez family to repaint their house twice, and even banned Christmas lights last year because she thought they looked tacky. But now, she had crossed the line one too many times. "We're tired of it," Thompson said. "And we think it's time someone did something about it." I raised an eyebrow. "We?" He smirked. Turns out, there was an entire secret resistance movement inside the neighborhood. Homeowners who had been silently suffering under Karen's reign of terror. And now, thanks to my flamingo fiasco, they were ready to fight back. I leaned forward. "What are you suggesting?" "We take the war to her," he said. "Together." A slow grin spread across my face. Karen had just united the entire neighborhood against her, and she had no idea what was coming next. The key to beating Karen wasn't just annoying her. It was outsmarting her. We started small. That week, every single house on the block started subtly rebelling. Lisa, a single mom, started parking her kid's bike in her driveway every day, just long enough for Karen to notice. Mike and Sharon put up fairy lights inside their window, not outside, technically within regulation, but enough to drive Karen insane. Paul, a military vet, raised an even bigger flag, but within HOA regulations, and added spotlights illuminating it at night. Karen was losing her mind. She couldn't find us for anything because technically, we weren't breaking the rules. Her rage built by the day, but that was just the warm-up. With Karen on edge, it was time to escalate. One night, dozens of pink flamingos appeared on every lawn. Except mine. Lisa had 5 in a neat little row. Paul had a single flamingo saluting next to his flag. Even the old couple down the street, who never got involved in drama, put one by their mailbox. It was an act of unity. An act of defiance. Karen snapped. The next morning, she stormed up and down the street, screaming at everyone. "You think this is funny? You think this is cute?" No one answered. We all just watched from our windows, sipping our coffee, pretending not to notice her meltdown. Karen did what Karen did. She tried to report everyone. But here's the thing. She had no power over the board. She wasn't the HOA president. She was just the loudest, most obnoxious enforcer. And the board? They were getting sick of her, too. But Karen wasn't done. She had one more move up her sleeve. That night, a new rule appeared in the HOA guidelines. Effective immediately, all lawn decorations, including flamingos, garden gnomes, and decorative items, are strictly prohibited. She had banned everything, even her own garden gnomes. Karen was so desperate to win that she sacrificed her own yard. For the first time in history, Karen had gone too far. Even her most die-hard supporters started turning on her. The neighborhood erupted in complaints. But Karen wasn't backing down. She doubled down, sending threatening letters to anyone who resisted. That's when we realized. It was time for the nuclear option. Karen had left us no choice. We were going bigger. I went online and ordered something so ridiculous, so over the top, that Karen wouldn't be able to comprehend it. A 20-foot-tall inflatable Godzilla. The plan was simple. Install it overnight, right in my front yard. A giant, unstoppable, neon green kaiju, standing in direct defiance of Karen's tyranny. A message. A warning. Karen wanted a war. This was war. And when she woke up the next morning, she would never be the same. At exactly 2 a.m., a small team of us gathered in my front yard, working in near silence under the dim glow of porch lights. Paul brought an industrial-grade air pump. Lisa and Mike stood watch at the end of the street, ensuring Karen wasn't lurking. The massive inflatable Godzilla lay in a heap on my lawn, waiting to be unleashed. With a flip of a switch, the air pump roared to life. The beast began to rise. At first, just a lump of wrinkled fabric. Then, a hulking form took shape. Towering. Monstrous. Glowing green in the night. By the time we were done, Godzilla stood proudly in my yard, its massive claws outstretched toward Karen's house. Someone muttered, "This is the stupidest, most beautiful thing I've ever seen." I stepped back and admired our work. Godzilla was so big that the top of its head loomed over Karen's second-story window. If she so much as glanced outside, she'd wake up to a nightmare. We exchanged grins, snapped a few pictures for evidence, and then dispersed before anyone could catch us. Now all that was left to do was wait. At 6:30 a.m., my security cameras captured the moment Karen stepped outside. She had her usual morning routine, coffee in hand, robe tied snugly around her waist, slippers shuffling against the pavement. She took one step forward, looked up, and froze. For a solid 5 seconds, she just stood there, staring up at the 20-foot neon green kaiju towering over her house. Then, her coffee cup slipped from her hand, shattering on the pavement. She stumbled backward, pointing a shaking finger at the beast looming over her. Even through my security camera's audio, I could hear her scream. What is this? What is this?" She staggered back into her house, vanished for about 30 seconds, then came sprinting back out, this time with her phone in hand. An alert popped up on my phone. Someone has called the HOA emergency line. Karen wasn't just mad. She was terrified. And then, it got even better. She called the police. 20 minutes later, a patrol car rolled up. I was already standing on my porch, casually sipping my coffee, pretending to be just as surprised as anyone else. The officer stepped out, and took one look at Godzilla, then at Karen, then back at Godzilla. He sighed. "Ma'am, is this the emergency?" Karen, borderline hysterical, threw her hands up. "It's a direct violation of HOA guidelines. It's intimidation. It's harassment." The officer rubbed his temples like he regretted every life choice that had led him to this moment. "Ma'am, it's a lawn decoration." Karen turned red. "It's a menace." The officer turned to me. "Sir, is there any actual crime happening here?" I shrugged, keeping a straight face. "I don't think so, officer. I just really love classic movie monsters." The officer stared at me for a long moment, then sighed and turned back to Karen. "Ma'am, this is not a police matter." Karen sputtered. But the HOA. "Take it up with them," the officer said flatly before getting back in his car and driving off. I waved as he left. Karen, now completely livid, stomped back inside, presumably to draft the most unhinged HOA complaint in history. By noon, the HOA board had called an emergency meeting. I wasn't invited, but my inside sources, aka Paul and Mr. Thompson, kept me updated. Apparently, Karen demanded immediate action. But there was a problem. I had checked the HOA rules very carefully before doing this. And nowhere did it say inflatable decorations were banned. Karen tried everything. She ranted about neighborhood harmony. She claimed monstrosities like this would destroy property values. She threatened to quit the HOA, which, honestly, would have been a win for everyone. But then, one of the board members, clearly fed up with her antics, finally snapped. "Karen, you're the one who banned lawn decorations. We can't just make exceptions for you now." Karen looked like she was going to explode. She had trapped herself in her own rules. She had lost. For the first time in HOA history, Karen had no power. But just when I thought I had won, the HOA pulled a last-minute move I didn't see coming. A notice was placed in my mailbox that afternoon. The HOA had called an official vote on whether I should be removed from the neighborhood. They were trying to kick me out. The war wasn't over yet. If Karen thought she could kick me out of my own neighborhood, she had another thing coming. I had 48 hours before the HOA vote. That meant I had 2 days to convince enough homeowners that Karen was the real problem, not me. I wasn't going down without a fight. That night, the neighborhood resistance gathered again: Paul, Mr. Thompson, Lisa, Mike, and a few others. The mood was different this time. Before, it had been about fun, annoying Karen just enough to fight back. But now it was serious. "Let's be honest," Lisa said. "If Karen wins this vote, we're all next. She's just getting started." Mike nodded. "She won't stop until this place looks like some dystopian HOA nightmare." Mr. Thompson sipped his whiskey. "Then we stop her." I exhaled. We had one chance. The vote was in 2 days. That meant we had 48 hours to rally the neighborhood and prove that Karen was drunk on power. The next morning, we launched our counterattack. We went door to door, talking to every homeowner. We showed them Karen's pattern of abuse, her ridiculous fines, her selective enforcement of HOA rules, the way she manipulated the board to push her own agenda. We weren't just making noise now. We were rallying the neighborhood. And the biggest weapon we had? Karen's own arrogance. People were tired of her. The Flamingo War had been funny at first, but now that she was using the HOA to evict people, she had crossed a line. By the night before the vote, we had a full-blown rebellion on our hands. But we still didn't know if it was enough. Voting day arrived. The HOA meeting was held in the community center, a beige, lifeless building that somehow smelled like printer ink and crushed dreams. The place was packed. Even people who had never cared about HOA politics were here for the drama. Karen sat at the front, arms crossed, smug as ever. The HOA president, a balding man in a sweater vest, cleared his throat. "All right, let's get started." Karen immediately stood. "Before we begin, I'd like to state the obvious. This neighborhood is falling apart because of one person. We've had a breakdown in order, in harmony, in respect, and it's all because of him." She turned and pointed directly at me. I stood too. "Actually, I'd like to make a statement." The HOA president sighed, but motioned for me to continue. I turned to the room. "Let's talk about what's really happening here," I said. "This isn't about lawn decorations. It's not even about HOA rules. This is about control. About one person using this board to force everyone to follow her personal preferences. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I continued, Karen doesn't want a community, she wants a dictatorship. She has fined families over wind chimes. She has threatened homeowners over Christmas lights. She called the police over a balloon. And now, when someone finally pushes back, she tries to kick them out. People nodded. I could see it, the shift. Karen's smug expression faltered. That's not true, she sputtered. I've only been enforcing the rules. I pulled out printed emails, complaints from residents, and photos of her own violations, proof that she had been bending the rules for herself while enforcing them on others. Then Mr. Thompson stood. I'd like to add something. He held up a printed document. I recognized it instantly. It was a financial audit of the HOA. Karen froze. According to these records, Mr. Thompson said, certain HOA funds have been misallocated. Whispers spread. Karen's face turned ghostly white. She stammered. I don't know what you're talking about. But it was too late. We had proof. The HOA president frowned. Karen, is this true? Silence. For the first time ever, Karen had nothing to say. The vote was called immediately. The first item on the ballot was whether I should be removed. It wasn't even close. Over 90% voted against my removal. Karen had failed. Then came the second vote. A motion to remove Karen from the HOA board entirely. It passed unanimously. Karen stood up so fast that her chair nearly tipped over. You can't do this, she hissed, looking around. But no one backed her up. She had alienated everyone. And just like that, she was gone. Karen stormed out of the meeting, shoving past people on her way to the door. As soon as it slammed shut behind her, the room erupted in cheers. We had won. And Godzilla? Godzilla was here to stay. The neighborhood felt different the next morning. Lighter. Freer. Almost like the air itself had been cleansed of an invisible weight. Karen was gone. No more ridiculous fines. No more passive-aggressive letters. No more angry early morning patrols. For the first time in years, people actually enjoyed their homes. Neighbors who had barely spoken to each other before were now chatting on sidewalks, trading stories about their run-ins with Karen. Kids rode their bikes freely, without fear of getting their parents fined. And my Godzilla? He stood proud and victorious, towering over the cul-de-sac as a monument to our rebellion. A week later, the new HOA leadership held their first meeting. It wasn't about enforcing rules. It was about undoing all the nonsense Karen had put in place. The flamingo ban? Repealed. The Christmas light restriction? Gone. The bike rule? Completely erased. The neighborhood celebrated. That night, dozens of flamingos reappeared, not just on my lawn, but on nearly every yard in the neighborhood. A silent tribute. A sign that Karen had lost. And the best part? For the first time in HOA history, nobody could do a thing about it.